Picture a girl, maybe 9 years old, crouched at the edge of a dying grass fire on an African plain nearly 2 million years ago. The animals that fled the flames are dead now, scattered and scorched in the black stubble, and she is hungry enough to do the unthinkable. She reaches into the still smoking ash, burns her fingers, and pulls out a piece of an antelope that the fire has already half consumed. And when she bites into it, something happens inside her body that will, over the next 100,000 generations, kill off every other kind of human on Earth and leave only her descendants standing. She doesn't know any of that. She only knows that the meat is warm and soft, and that it does not fight her teeth the way raw flesh does. She knows it smells extraordinary. She has no idea that she is participating in the single most important thing our ancestors ever did. More important than the wheel, more important than writing, more important than the atomic bomb. She is eating cooked food. And that one act, repeated across an unimaginable stretch of time, is the reason you have the brain you are using to understand this sentence right now. We treat cooking as background noise. It is the thing that happens before the meal, the chore, the smell from the kitchen. We have entire television channels dedicated to it, and we still somehow think of it as trivial. But the story of why humans started burning their food is not a story about recipes. It is a story about extinction, about empire, about slavery and salt and gold, and the shape of the human skull itself. And almost none of it starts where you think it does. Because the story of cooked food does not begin with a chef, or a kitchen, or even a human being as you would recognize one. It begins with a creature that was not quite us, standing on a burning grassland, making a choice that would rewrite what a human being even is. Let me take you back there. The world of that little girl was not the world of humans. It was the world of a creature we call Homo erectus, upright, tough, small-brained by our standards, wandering the savannas of East Africa. And here's the thing that should stop you cold. For most of the history of life on this planet, no animal had ever cooked anything. Not once. In 4 billion years of evolution, every living creature ate its food the way the world handed it to them. Raw, cold, alive, or rotting. Cooking is not natural. It is one of the only things humans do that no other animal on Earth does, at scale, deliberately, every single day. And when it began, it was almost certainly an accident born of catastrophe. Lightning strikes a dry grassland. Fire sweeps across the plain. It is terrifying. It is death itself, roaring and orange. And every animal with sense runs from it. But in the smoking aftermath, our ancestors noticed something. The fire left food behind. Roots buried in the soil came out soft and sweet. Animals too slow to flee came out cooked. For a hungry creature, the most frightening thing on the landscape had just become the greatest free meal it had ever encountered. Now think about what that actually required. To benefit from fire, you first had to overcome the deepest instinct any animal possesses, the instinct that screams at you to run from the flames. Our ancestors had to walk toward the thing that every other creature fled. That is the first strange, almost unnatural decision at the root of everything we are. We are the animal that walked into the fire. But walking into a dying fire to scavenge a burnt carcass is not the same as controlling it. And for an enormous span of time, hundreds of thousands of years, that gap was everything. Here is where we have to talk about what cooking actually did to the body, because this is the part that turns a campfire into the engine of human history. Raw food is expensive, not in money, in energy. A raw potato, a raw yam, a piece of raw meat, your gut has to spend an enormous amount of effort breaking it down. And even then, it only extracts a fraction of what's inside. This is why the great apes, our closest cousins, spend up to half of their waking lives just chewing. A gorilla is essentially a machine for processing raw vegetation, all day, every day, with a gut the size of a barrel to do it. Cooking is pre-digestion. When you apply heat to food, you are doing outside the body the work the body would otherwise have to do inside it. Heat unravels proteins. It bursts the starch grains in a root and turns them into something your body can flood with sugar in minutes. It kills the parasites and the bacteria that would otherwise poison you. A cooked meal gives you dramatically more energy for dramatically less effort, and it does it fast. And the human body over time did something no accountant would ever have authorized. It bet everything on fire. Our guts shrank. We have a small, almost delicate digestive system compared to any ape our size because we outsourced digestion to the flame. Our teeth shrank. Our jaws, those massive chewing muscles that armor the skulls of other primates, softened and receded. We gave up the biological hardware for eating raw food, permanently. And we did it because we were confident the fire would always be there. And with all that saved energy, the energy no longer spent on chewing and churning, the body could afford to feed the single most expensive organ any animal has ever grown, the brain. Your brain is roughly 2% of your body weight, and it devours around a fifth of your energy every hour, awake or asleep. You could never have grown it, never have paid for it on a raw diet. The math simply does not work. A creature eating raw food the way we live would have to chew for 9 hours a day to fuel a brain like yours. So sit with this for a moment. The organ you are thinking with right now was purchased. It was paid for in cooked calories, in soft, warm food pulled from the ashes, generation after generation, until the animal that walked into the fire became something that could imagine gods and build cathedrals and ask why it started cooking in the first place. We did not evolve big brains and then invent cooking to feed them. It was the other way around. Cooking came first. The brain was the reward. And that means the little girl at the fire is not a footnote in human history. She is the beginning of it. The clock of the human mind had just started ticking. Our ancestors just had no way of knowing what it was counting toward. Now, for a long time, controlling fire was a kind of forbidden knowledge. Not forbidden by any priest, but by nature itself. Because there's a world of difference between using a fire the lightning gave you and making one yourself. The first was luck. The second was power. And here we meet the ancient genius of the story, though not a single one of their names survives. Somewhere in the deep past, human beings figured out how to summon fire out of nothing, out of 2 sticks, out of a spark struck from stone. Think about how impossible that must have seemed. You have watched the sky throw fire down at the world, unpredictable and divine, and now you have learned to pull that same force out of a piece of dry wood with your own hands. There was no word for chemistry. There was no concept of friction generating heat, no understanding of combustion or oxygen or fuel. They did not have the science. But they were doing the science anyway, kneeling in the dirt, spinning a spindle against a board until the smoke came, coaxing an ember the size of a grain of rice into a flame that could keep a whole family alive through a freezing night. That ember changed everything about what it meant to be human, and not only through the stomach. Fire pushed back the dark. For the first time, our ancestors had hours after sunset that were not simply spent hiding and waiting for dawn. They had light. They had warmth. They had a circle of safety that predators would not cross. And around that fire, in those stolen hours, something new was born. The evening. The gathering. People sat together, faces lit orange, and they did the thing humans do better than any creature alive. They talked. They told stories. Anthropologists who study the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies found something remarkable. That daytime conversation is mostly practical, about work and food and complaints, but firelight conversation, night conversation, turns to something else entirely, to stories, to the spirit world, to people who are not there, to imagination itself. The hearth was the first classroom and the first theater. Cooking did not just feed the brain the calories it needed, it built the very stage on which human culture learned to perform. And it also quietly did something else. It split up the day's labor. Someone tended the fire and prepared the food. Someone went out to find it. And in that division, who cooks, who hunts, who guards the flame, we can see the faint outline of the very first social order, the first roles, the first rules about who does what. The kitchen, if you can call a ring of stones a kitchen, was also the first political institution humans ever built. But you cannot tell the history of cooking as one smooth climb toward the modern kitchen, because the relationship between humans and their fire has always been strange, suspicious, and full of fear. And this is where the story takes a turn that most people never hear. Because cooking was not always celebrated. For long stretches of history, and among some of the most sophisticated people who ever lived, cooking was regarded with deep suspicion, even as a kind of corruption. To many ancient philosophers, cooked food was food that had been meddled with, softened, made luxurious and decadent. The plainer and more austere your diet, the more virtuous you were. Spartans were famous for a black broth so grim that a visitor from another city, after tasting it, reportedly said he finally understood why the Spartans did not fear death. Elaborate cooking was seen as the mark of a soft, corrupt civilization, and there were serious thinkers who believed that the more a people fussed over their food, the closer they were to moral collapse. And it went deeper than snobbery. Fire itself was sacred, and sacred things are dangerous. In Rome, the flame at the heart of the state was tended by the Vestal virgins, priestesses sworn to keep the sacred fire burning. If that fire went out, it was a catastrophe, an omen of doom for the entire city, and the priestess responsible could be whipped. A Vestal who broke her vow of chastity could be buried alive. That is how seriously they took fire. The same force that cooked their dinner was so holy that letting it die could get you executed. There was, running underneath all of this, a very old anxiety. The suspicion that in cooking our food, in transforming it with fire, we were doing something that trespassed on territory that belonged to the gods. Nearly every ancient culture has a myth about fire being stolen. The Greeks told of Prometheus, who stole fire from the heavens and gave it to humankind, and was punished for it with an eternity of torture, chained to a rock while an eagle ate his liver each day. Notice the shape of that story. Fire is not ours by right. It is stolen property. It is a gift we were never supposed to have, and there is a price. That myth, told and retold for thousands of years, is really a memory, a cultural memory of the moment our species crossed a line no animal had ever crossed, and the deep unease that came with it. So the establishment of the ancient world did not simply embrace cooked food as progress. Philosophers sneered at it. Priesthoods guarded the flame with lethal seriousness. And the oldest stories humanity ever told whispered that we had stolen something we would one day have to pay for. But no amount of suspicion could hold back what fire could do, because it wasn't just changing our bodies anymore. It was about to change the entire surface of the planet and hand a weapon to anyone ruthless enough to use it. Here's the part that turns a warm hearth into an instrument of raw power. Once you can cook food, you can preserve it. And once you can preserve it, you can store it. And once you can store it, you can control it. This is the hinge on which all of human civilization swings. A hunter-gatherer eats what they find and shares it, because raw meat rots in a day and there is no point in hoarding what will spoil. But a people who can smoke fish, dry meat over a fire, parch grain and store it in sealed jars, those people can accumulate. They can build a surplus. And a surplus is the beginning of everything we mean by the word civilization, for better and very much for worse. Cooking made grain edible. That is the fact hiding underneath every empire that ever taxed a peasant. Raw wheat, raw barley, raw rice, these are nearly useless to the human body. But grind them, add water, and apply heat, and suddenly you have bread, you have porridge, you have something that keeps and travels and can be counted, taxed, stockpiled, and rationed. The first cities were not built on gold. They were built on cooked grain sitting in state granaries, controlled by kings and priests who decided who ate and who did not. Think about that little handful of cooked barley. A single fistful, nothing, a snack. Now multiply it across a river valley and put it under lock and key in a temple storehouse, and that same humble cooked grain becomes the thing that lets a ruler raise an army, feed slaves, and starve a rebellious village into obedience. The soft, warm food the girl pulled from the ashes had become the hardest form of power on earth. Whoever controlled the fire and the grain controlled the people. Cooked calories were the original currency, and empires were, at bottom, machines for turning them into muscle and loyalty. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. Because the same fire that freed us also built the first cages, and the darkest chapters of human history run straight through the cooking fire in ways we have almost entirely forgotten. Consider sugar, which cannot be eaten as it grows and must be boiled, cooked, in enormous vats to become the crystal we know. On the plantations of the Caribbean, in the 17th and 18th centuries, that cooking was done by enslaved men, women, and children. working in what witnesses described as the closest thing to hell on the surface of the earth. The cane had to be cut and crushed, and its juice boiled down fast, before it spoiled, in a chain of copper cauldrons over roaring furnaces. The heat was unbearable. The work was ceaseless during harvest, sometimes 18 hours a day, and the boiling houses ran through the night. The most feared job belonged to the person who tended the final, hottest cauldron. If exhaustion made them careless and a hand slipped into the boiling sugar, the burn was catastrophic. There was an axe kept beside the vats, kept there deliberately, so that a trapped arm could be severed before the whole body was pulled in. I want you to hold a single teaspoon of sugar in your mind, that white, ordinary crystal you stir into your coffee without a thought. It was cooked. Someone stood over a furnace in the tropical heat and boiled it into being, and that someone was very often a person who had been stolen from their home, shipped across an ocean in chains, and worked toward an early death so that Europe could sweeten its tea. Millions of Africans were enslaved to feed the world's new hunger for cooked sugar. The fire that had made us human was now consuming human beings by the boatload. This is the part that should make you angry. Not because cooking is evil, it is the most human thing we do, but because the moment we learn to preserve and concentrate and transform food with heat, we also learn to build entire economies on the backs of the people forced to do the transforming. The technology that had once been shared around a family hearth became, in the wrong hands, a reason to own other human beings. And it was not only sugar. It was salt, needed to preserve cooked and smoked food, so precious that Roman soldiers were, by legend, partly paid in it, giving us the word salary. It was the spice trade, which sent ships and armies and conquistadors halfway around the world in search of the flavors that made cooked food a luxury worth killing for. Whole islands were depopulated, whole peoples wiped out, over the right to control what went into the cooking pot. The Dutch, at one point, massacred and enslaved nearly the entire population of the Banda Islands, thousands of people, for a monopoly on nutmeg, a seed whose only purpose was to season food. The blight of these atrocities was not nature. The famines and the flavors were the pretext. The scale of the dying was policy, decided in comfortable rooms by men who wrote their orders down. And one of those men will stand in for all of them. His name was Jan Pieter Zoon Koen, the Dutch governor-general who conquered the Banda Islands. When his superiors back home expressed some discomfort at the sheer brutality of what he had done, Koen did not flinch. He wrote back defending it, insisting that they should not be troubled, that the trade could not be maintained without war, nor war without trade. He committed that logic to official correspondence, not muttered in private, but written down for his employers to read. The massacre of a people justified as a sound business decision for the seasoning of food. He was celebrated. There are still places named after him. That is how thoroughly we buried the cost of what we cook. Sit with that for a moment. The spices in your cabinet, the sugar in your bowl, the salt on your table, the very things that turn raw fuel into a meal you actually want to eat, carry a history written in blood. We seasoned our food, and somewhere along the way, we seasoned it with other people's lives. The clock that started ticking at that first fire had led us here, and it was not done yet. Now let me pull you back from the darkness, because the story of cooking does not end in the boiling house. It accelerates into a world so strange that the girl at the fire could never have dreamed it. And some of it will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Start with this. For nearly 2 million years, the fundamental technology of cooking barely changed. Fire, food, heat, time. And then, in a span of just a couple of centuries, it exploded. The canning of cooked food, sealing it in metal and glass so it would never spoil, was invented not by a chef, but for an army. Napoleon, it is said, offered a prize for a way to preserve food for his soldiers on the march, because an army, as he understood, travels on its stomach. The winner was a French confectioner named Nicolas Appert, who figured out how to seal cooked food in jars and heat them. He had no idea why it worked. The science of bacteria was still decades away. He was, once again, a human being doing the science without the words for it. And he handed the world the technology that would one day fill supermarket shelves and feed soldiers in every war since. Then came the truly bizarre. In 1945, an American engineer named Percy Spencer was standing next to a piece of radar equipment, a magnetron, when he noticed that a chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. Most people would have just been annoyed about the ruined chocolate. Spencer got curious. He held up food to the device. He popped popcorn with invisible waves of energy. He had just discovered that you could cook food with radiation, and the microwave oven was born. A machine that cooks by making the water molecules inside your food vibrate millions of times a second, heating it from the inside out. Nearly every home in America now has one. We heat our leftovers with a technology invented by accident, from a weapon of war, because a man wondered why his candy melted. And cooking followed us off the planet entirely. When humans went to space, they had to solve the problem of how to eat where there is no up, no down, no open flame, no way to boil water in the way we always had. Freeze-dried meals, cooked, and then reduced to shelf-stable powder to be rehydrated in orbit, made space travel possible. The astronauts on the moon ate food that had been cooked on Earth and resurrected in the void. The same act that the little girl performed at the edge of a grass fire 2 million years ago now happens in orbit, 300 miles above the planet, in a tin can, hurtling through the vacuum at 17,000 miles an hour. From the ashes of a savanna to the silence of space, we have never stopped cooking. We cannot stop. It is who we are. And here's a fact to leave you with before we return to that fire. There is a real scientific argument, taken seriously by respected researchers, that cooking is not just something humans do, it is the thing that made humans human in the first place. That without it, there would be no us. No cities, no writing, no music, no you. Every other human species that ever walked the earth, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, all our vanished cousins, is gone. We are the only ones left. And one of the leading explanations for why we survived and thrived while they faded is that we mastered the fire and the pot more completely than any creature ever had. We outcooked the competition. We are, quite literally, the ape that learned to burn its dinner and never looked back. So think about that the next time you stand in your kitchen. The stove, the toaster, the pan on the burner, these are not conveniences. They are the oldest, deepest, most transformative technology our species has ever possessed. Older than the wheel, older than language, older than farming. Everything else we ever built, we built with brains that fire paid for. Now, go back with me one last time to the burning grassland, to the girl 9 years old, hungry, reaching into the ash with her small burned fingers to pull out a piece of warm meat. She does not know she is standing at the beginning of the human story. She does not know that the softness of that food, the ease of it, will let her descendants grow the very brain that will one day look up at the moon and put food there. She does not know that the same flame will cook grain into empires, boil sugar into slavery, and season history with the blood of nations. She does not know any of it. She only knows that she is hungry, and that the fire, the terrifying fire, has left her something to eat. Everything you are began with a bite exactly like that one. You have eaten cooked food every single day of your life. You have never once thought of it as remarkable. But it is the reason you can think at all. The reason your jaw is small and your gut is short, and your skull is full of the most expensive, extraordinary organ in the known universe. It killed off our rivals. It built our kings. It powered our cruelties and our cathedrals alike. And it started with a frightened animal that did the one thing no animal had ever done, walked toward the flames instead of away. You will never look at a warm meal the same way again. Before you go, I want to know which part stayed with you. Was it the axe kept beside the boiling sugar vats, waiting for the moment a trapped hand had to be severed? The horror we forget in every teaspoon. Was it Percy Spencer and the melted chocolate bar that gave us the microwave by pure accident? Or was it the cooked meals resurrected in orbit, the oldest human act performed 300 miles above the Earth? Drop a comment and tell me which one you'll be thinking about tonight. And if this changed the way you see the things simmering on your stove, stay with us. Because the next ordinary object we open up has a history even darker than this one.